Hello, everyone. This is Dave Iverson, contributing editor at the Michael J. Fox Foundation and your moderator for today's webinar, From iPhone to Genome, How Patient Data is Changing Parkinson's Research. This is part of our continuing series, of course, of our third Thursday webinars, which take place at 12 Eastern, the third Thursday of every month, when we take up a topic that's important to the Parkinson's community, and we hope you'll continue to join us throughout the year. As always, during our conversation today, you'll be able to submit questions, and you'll see a Q&A box at the right of your screen. You can type your questions in there, and then in about a half hour or so, we'll start taking as many of those questions as we can. But as always, we never get to all of them during the course of our hour. And so we have an extra kind of follow-up opportunity that we want to let you know about, which is that tomorrow at noon with the hashtag FoxPDChat, we're going to continue the conversation on Twitter. Dr. Rachel Dolan will be available to answer additional questions that we don't get to today. And last, before we get started, I just want to also note that the slides from today's webinar are available for download. You'll see a box called Resource List on the right. If you click on that, and then you'll be able to open that in a browser, and you can save it or print it from there. So let's get started with our topic today, From iPhone to Genome, How Patient Data is Changing Parkinson's Research. Here's what we're going to cover on today's edition of our webinar. We're going to take a look at what key questions continue to be present in Parkinson's disease research. What are some of the things that are difficult problems to solve, and how might this new data approach answer some of them? How might it provide different kinds of research information than more traditional methods of conducting Parkinson's research? We'll look specifically at this idea of technology-enabled research and what those tools can provide. And then we're going to talk some about what those tools are today and what's available. And for those of you like me, by the way, who are not necessarily technologically super savvy, don't worry about this hour being sort of heavy on tech. We're not going to get all nerdy on you. We're going to really try to talk about those pesky problems in Parkinson's research and how this new approach may actually be a way to solve some of the most daunting problems in Parkinson's research. So it's a means to an end, and the end, I think, is one that all of us care about, whether we're technologically savvy or not. And we have some great people to lead us along the way in that conversation, and so let me introduce them to you. Joining us today are Bob Harmon. Bob was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2006. He has entered this brave new world of participating in some of this technologically enabled research as well as traditional Parkinson's research. And Bob, thank you very much for being part of our conversation today.
My pleasure, Dave.
Joining us as well is Dr. Ray Dorsey. He is a professor of neurology and the director of CHET, which is the Center for Human Experimental Therapeutics at the University of Rochester Medical Center. Dr. Dorsey, thanks for being part of our discussion today as well.
My pleasure.
And last, Claire Meunier. She is the Vice President of Research Engagement at the Michael J. Fox Foundation and is shepherding along this new enterprise within the Fox Foundation world. Claire, thanks for being part of our program as well.
Of course, it's good to be here.
All right, let's look at some of those questions that I was talking about a moment ago that still remain difficult problems to solve. And these are things I think all of us within the Parkinson's community, those of us who either live with Parkinson's ourselves or who have family members who do think about a lot, which is, number one, why is Parkinson's so variable? That old saying that if you've met one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's. Why is it so varied? Why does it seem to proceed in such a different manner from person to person? How can we do a better job of monitoring Parkinson's progression we get beyond those finger tapping tests or the things that we do when we go see our neurologist every 6 months or so? Are there different kinds of Parkinson's disease? Are there different subtypes? Why do some of us respond one way to medication and others respond another? What about getting more information? So it's not just those visits that happen when we go to the neurologist every 6 months. And what is it really like to live with Parkinson's year-round? The CEO of the Fox Foundation has a nice way of putting this, which is that our day living with Parkinson's disease is data for researchers. So your day is their data. And if we can do a better job of collecting our days cumulatively, then we can provide that much more information for researchers. So what we want to show you next is a little example of how these new technologies can work. We're going to see actually something that's, you're going to see my fingers, exciting, huh? That we recorded when I was at the Fox Foundation last week, tapping, among other things, on a new kind of way of collecting data. This is something that Ray Dorsey helped develop called Empower, and which many of you are familiar with. So let's take a look at that video, and then we'll ask Ray to explain a little bit of what we are seeing. So if we can go ahead and play the video, I'll sort of talk through what it is that we're seeing as soon as we're able to get it up on the screen. So this is something where it tests you using an iPhone, your ability to tap. So here I go, tapping with my left hand, which for me is the more problematic hand. And Ray, tell us what we're seeing here.
Sure. So we know that individuals with Parkinson's have bradykinesia, or slowness of movement. So my colleague developed a test that individuals can do in their home to assess how well their speed and movements are. And then the next one.
And what you're seeing now actually is, go ahead, sorry.
Is a voice recording. So you're just saying for 20 seconds. And Dr. Max Little in the UK, a mathematician, showed that mathematical analysis of voice can differentiate individuals with Parkinson's from those without, and predict disease severity based on voice analysis. And this third test is just a simple test of memory that we know is often impaired in individuals with Parkinson's disease. So you're just told to click on the sequence of flowers in the same sequence that they're provided to you.
And I'm happy to report that I actually got the sequence right, although it gets a lot harder over the course of the sequence. But it's a little bit of a sampling for what's involved in this kind of research and the kind of data that we can collect. So let's go ahead and look at our next slide if we can, and we can get a sense of what some of these things provide. So proceed along those lines, if you would, Ray Dorsey. We just saw a little excerpt about that, and that's at this top thing that we see on the slide, the Parkinson's Empower application. Give us the big picture of what it is that you're trying to collect by having someone like me tap, and you see that I could tap a certain number of times over the course of a minute, or what my voice sounds like. What is it that you are hoping to really track and gather from that sort of process?
So to that specific question, we're trying to identify three things. One, to characterize the variation of symptoms within a given period of time. So we know from conversations with many of your listeners that individuals with Parkinson's have fluctuations in the course of their symptoms over the course of the day. But in 2015, before this, we have no good way of objectively measuring that fluctuation over time. The second is we're trying to identify, are there modulators of individual symptoms that we can identify? So for example, could you do your test pre and post administration of a medication like levodopa, and can we determine whether we can see benefit from that medication or lack of benefit from that medication based on your assessments? Similarly, can we see response in response to exercise, diet, sleep as potential modulators of Parkinson's disease? And third, and really importantly, is we want to provide the information back to the participants. So you said in the beginning it's your day, their data. We would say it's the individual's day, it's their data for their benefit, and their benefit as an individual, and then their benefit as a member of a Parkinson's disease community that hopefully researchers can help advance our understanding of the natural history of Parkinson's disease.
And Bob Harmon, let me bring you into our conversation at this point. Again, Bob is someone like me living with Parkinson's disease, and I know you've said that that's something you find appealing about this, is that it gives you a sort of better sense of kind of how you're doing and allows you to kind of be in touch with your own day, your own data in a sense.
Yeah, well, Dave, I think what it really does for me is it takes me out of the big picture, where I look at myself and how I'm doing from the time I go see my doc to the next time I see him. And what it does is it brings me into the daily picture. It allows me to understand what's really going on to me as meds wear off and meds come on. And it puts me more in tune with where I am and what I'm doing, so that when I go see my doctor, I've got that information and I can talk to him about it.
Mm-hmm. And so I think we can all get, at least I can understand how this can be helpful to people like Bob and me, Ray Dorsey. What's a little harder for me to get my arms around is, how do you collect all of this? In other words, it's clear that, I can see, well, on this day I'm tapping at this rate, and on this day I'm tapping at that rate, and that's interesting for me. But what does it tell you as a researcher, and how do you aggregate all of this? If there are 10,000 people tapping, how do you put that all together into some sort of meaningful picture?
Well, this has never been done before, so we've never actually had data on multiple observations on individuals within a day and then over the course of a time. So we're going to be able to say for Mr. Harmon, how much fluctuation is there in Parkinson's disease for someone who's had Parkinson's disease, I believe, for 10 years, and then we're going to be able to say, well, what's the rate of progression using these new objective, and we think in some cases very sensitive measures of Parkinson's disease. And then one of the hopes is that we can use some of these measures in clinical trials in the future to determine whether a new drug or a new device or a new intervention, whether it's exercise or diet, for example, is effective or not. So the tools that we have right now in 2014 are really insensitive. So almost all your listeners have been asked to tap their thumb and index finger together as big and fast as they can 10 times. And then clinicians like me rate that from a scale from 0 to 4, 0 being normal and 4 being unable to do so. And you can see that kind of measurement is crude and subjective. It varies depending on whether I'm doing the assessment or my colleague is doing the assessment. We think that these tools, in addition to providing information to participants about their own health, in addition to enhancing our understanding of the natural history of Parkinson's disease, which is a benefit to the entire community, could eventually be used as tools to determine whether new therapies or new interventions are likely to be effective.
And Claire, bring us into the Fox part of this puzzle with Fox Insight, what it is and why it is that the Fox Foundation is pretty vigorously pursuing this idea.
Yeah, so Fox Insight is meant to be a portal of all of these virtual research opportunities. So Empower is one sort of major example of the kinds of ways that patients can be contributing this data, but there are a lot of other mechanisms through which this kind of data can be aggregated all in one place and then made available to the research community in a sort of coordinated fashion. And so that's exactly what Fox Insight is. And I think the foundation is really excited about the way that some of these technologies can really complement the traditional research paradigm, and we're excited about going there and about collecting as much data as we can from as many people as we can, not waiting every 6 months for a clinician to see them and have that sort of subjective assessment, but actually be able to get the information directly from patients on an ongoing basis en masse, and to sort of see what the potential of all that might be. And it's exciting for us to be launching this tool and bringing together all of these different initiatives in a way that enables patients to sort of do this in a very sort of efficient way, and also in a way that's making the outcomes of it available to as many people as possible who could be interested in actually conducting analyses and coming out with some findings from it.
And there's also some risk, though, in this, because as Ray was saying, we don't really know yet, I mean, how this is all going to go. So in a sense, is the foundation saying, we're not sure about this, but we think it's a worthy effort, and if we don't kind of get behind this, it may not advance as quickly. It's in some ways, it's an interesting choice, I think, in terms of how the foundation wants to try to nudge things along, even though we don't exactly know, really, where this all may take us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in an environment where more information is better, right? More information makes us better informed about the daily PD experience. And in the current, one of the challenges in the current trial sort of traditional research model is that, you know, it's expensive to bring someone into the clinic and give them all these different tests and assessments and take a physician's time to see them. And so the foundation sees this very much as a way, you know, sort of a low-cost way to do this with people who may not live near a clinic site, to really sort of understand from them what their experience is and potentially to really have new research ideas coming from the patient, who is really at the center of all of this stuff anyway, and not just be sort of a researcher's guess at what are the kinds of things we should be studying, what are the kinds of things we should be looking at. So I don't think it's as much as the verdict is still out on whether this is going to be valuable. I think there will absolutely be some value. I think over time, we will refine and further define what that value is, and that's sort of the piece of this that will definitely change over time. And I think it's an exciting piece of this because these online tools can be very dynamic. They can change as we're learning things about the database and we want to add new surveys to them to learn more about things that might be popping up and trends that might be growing. And so I think for that reason, we feel very sure that something's going to come from this. There is some uncertainty around what exactly, but we're putting a stake in the ground and we're doing so significantly because we really believe in this stuff, and we believe that, you know, it's not here to replace the traditional research model. There are very good reasons why we conduct those traditional trials, but that this can really be a complement to those efforts and sort of fill in some of the gaps in the picture that maybe we're not getting.
We're going to look side by side at these two alternative and then, as you suggest, Claire, complementary approaches to doing research in a moment. But before we get to that, I want to bring Ray Dorsey back in just for a moment, because one of the things that I think makes this interesting is that we're not entirely sure where it's going to go, and there is the opportunity then to refine and for patients really to participate in a different way in terms of how research gets done and how it's shaped. When you and I were talking on the phone the other day, Ray, I was telling you my little pet peeve about Empower was that the directions didn't specify whether or not I should use my left hand or my right hand on that tapping exercise. My left hand is the more challenged one, right hand not so much. And if you don't know which hand I'm using, how is that data going to be useful? And you were saying, good point, you know, we're going to keep refining this. So speak to that for a moment, if you would, about the way in which people who are participating in this can actually play a real role in the way in which the data is being shaped and collected.
Sure. So this app, Empower, is available for download in the Apple's iTunes store. You just write Empower plus Parkinson's, and you can download the app, go through the consent process, and do the tasks that were highlighted in the video. In addition, one of the activities is study feedback, and it says, in what ways would you improve or change the Empower study? And you send a little text message. You type in your suggestion, you hit done, and you send it to us, and we get your results back in real time. Similarly, there's another activity that says My Thoughts. So if individuals note, for example, that their Parkinson's disease is better after they do one form of exercise but not after another form of exercise, they can put down those observations and send them to us so that we can learn from the collective wisdom of individuals with Parkinson's disease. And then I just want to pick up on Claire's point about studies being expensive to sponsors and taking a lot of physicians' time. They're also expensive to research participants and takes up a lot of their time and their family's time and their caregivers' times. And what we're trying to do increasingly is, with Michael J. Fox, is provide tools to individuals with Parkinson's disease into the community so that they can participate in research regardless of where they live or who they are, and to be able to provide insights that are of direct benefit to them and also benefit to the research community.
Well, let's look at them side by side in our next slide, and we can sort of fill in what both you and Claire are saying about the difference between the two. So we see on this slide how we have these two different ways, the traditional studies with validated tests and exams, face-to-face attention and so forth, versus what we're calling the technology-enabled studies, which allow you to gather larger sample sizes and more frequent capturing of that data. But there's some weaknesses and limits to each. As Ray and Claire have said, one of the problems with traditional studies is that they're time intensive, you're geographically limited, you have to be in that particular area, whereas with these technology-enabled studies, you can participate from anywhere, but there are some problems and concerns perhaps about how that data is validated. So there are pros and cons to both. And what I want to talk about next is how they can work together. And before we get to that, though, Bob Harmon, let me ask you something, because you've done both. You've participated in this new way of doing things. You're also participating in more traditional research. And you were telling me right before we started that one of the pluses to you is the ease with which this can be done. Say something about that and about your experience with one study in particular where you had to fill out a more traditional diary with great frequency.
Well, the traditional studies, again, that's kind of outlined on the slide of some of the weaknesses of it, but they do take time. And the one trial that I'm in currently, part of the trial is that I had to keep a daily journal every half hour discussing what my symptoms were. Now, this was for a anti-dyskinesia drug, so I was talking mainly just about dyskinesia. But every half hour I had to log in on a journal what was going on with me. And that was really a pain in the neck. Where as of right now, and using Empower, you can see some of those things actually going on real time if you're looking at it. So it's really simple to do, but it doesn't replace the in the office trial. I think we got to do both of them side by side, which is kind of the approach I've taken. And the other thing I wanted to drop back for just an instant is that in using the Fox Insight, there are a number of features to it, one of which is your data reports. And you can actually print out what you said is going on with you as you're filling out your profile or answering the questions on a periodic basis and print it out. And you've got, when you go to the doctor's office, you take it with you and you hand it to them and you say, here's what's going on. And it's something I don't remember to do every time I go. I just talk about the three worst things that are going on and maybe forget about something that's important that he gets an opportunity to see.
I think that's a really good point, Bob. And I know, and when I was in the foundation office the other day and did that little tapping demonstration, I was very conscious of whether or not I was going to be able to get more taps in than I usually do. And I know what my record is with my left hand. And so it does make you more kind of cognizant, I think, in some ways, in a much more data-driven, empirical way than just kind of how you're feeling, which is interesting. Let's spend a moment on cost, and then we want to get to all of your questions. Lots of really good questions coming in. And we'll turn to those in a moment. But Claire, say something more about the cost issue here. It's frequently said that it costs $1 billion to get a drug to market. And a big part of that, right, is the cost of traditional research. It takes a lot of work to enroll people, takes a lot of time. Is part of the thinking here that this could kind of, speed the research process, that we could make quicker decisions because we'd get people enrolled with higher numbers and with greater ease?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think these online modalities are necessarily are ever going to replace sort of the traditional drug studies that need to happen, and even some of the traditional observational studies that need to happen. But when you look at sort of pure numbers of people that you can get in, you look at, people can use their own cell phone. We don't have to send you a cell phone. We don't have to transport you to the clinic. We don't have to, pay for expensive physicians' time to do some of this testing. Yes, this is much cheaper to do. on, on a per person basis and probably even on an overall basis once we have 10,000 people than the traditional study. And so I think for that reason, we really see this as a leveraged investment that we can make, again, to sort of complement some of the data that we're seeing coming out of those more traditional studies. And like I said before, it fills in some of the holes in the picture that existed prior to some of these online technologies. And I think, it's a really efficient investment for us to be making when we consider the potential of so many people participating.
And Ray Dorsey, is it also something that would maybe give us a clearer picture faster? For example, if you're trying to test a new drug and you want to find out whether or not it's working, if you've got 10,000 people reporting back on how it's working after they take a pill, or are they able to tap quicker or not, it would seem to me that you might be able to come to a quicker judgment and actually make a decision about, this just isn't working. Let's not pursue it. Let's let it go and move on. And as opposed to a study being extended out over a long period of time. Is that part of what may be possible?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. So Mr. Harmon's participating in a study right now looking at a drug for dyskinesias, and he's reporting whether he's feeling on, off, or on with dyskinesias every half an hour. We now have, rather than subjective assessments, we now have a tool that can provide objective assessments both through active structured tasks and passive monitoring to get to answers quicker. In the first month after the release of Empower, I think nearly 12,000 individuals, including many people on the phone, have enrolled in the study. So your ability to get to scale faster is much easier. Your ability now to do assessments in the home, regardless of where you are or who you are, is much easier. The ability to get objective data is for the first time possible. So all these things can, in the future, would decrease the amount of time it takes to determine whether a drug is efficacious or not. Half that $1 billion that's for cost to develop a successful drug, half of that's due to time. And if we can reduce that time, not only do you reduce the cost to develop a drug, but you you reduce the time to do so, so we can get treatments that are more likely efficacious to patients and their patients faster.
Let's begin to start with some of our questions. We'll circle back and review more of this as we go, but lots of good questions coming in, and let's get started and plug some of those in. Question came in just now from Ursula asking, what about doing this sort of test on computers? And someone earlier also raised the question, well, what about doing it on an iPad? So Ray Dorsey, are we limited to the iPhone, or are there other ways in which this data can be collected?
No, absolutely. The hope is that these things will be increasingly available on a wide variety of devices, including computers. And there are other technologies like Great Lakes Neurotechnologies that has devices to measure people's symptoms that are done on the computer. And I think we're going to see increasing amounts of devices and sensors, including ones that you wear, that can be used to determine how individual symptoms respond to treatment and respond to over time. I think it's increasingly likely that in the future we'll have multiple of these measures be included in studies in addition to traditional measures.
And a couple of people want to know whether or not, yes, go ahead, Claire.
Oh, I was just going to say, so the way that you get started on Fox Insight is actually through the computer. It's not through an iPhone mechanism, and that's sort of the core way that someone engages in Fox Insight. That's also the mechanism by which people can get notified of new features and new ways that we're tracking data. And one of the ways that we're doing that that's actually coming online in the next few weeks is through watches, so smart watches for people who, in this particular instance, have a non-BlackBerry and a non-Apple phone. So those people will actually be offered the opportunity to participate in sort of a special feature within Fox Insight where we'll provide you with a watch. You'll wear it. That watch will track accelerometer data about your movements and sort of send it back into the Fox Insight portal for researchers to then analyze. So we're already building some of these other sort of platforms through which we can be collecting this data into that tool.
So you're agnostic about this. I mean, a number of people are writing in saying, "Well, what about Android?" And so, I mean, you're not. This isn't like all Apple, all iPhone, all the time, right? I mean, you can come into this. Yeah, yeah. Okay,
And just
great.
On the
Yeah, Ray
on
Dorsey.
the Android, we're doing a study with Max Little through Parkinson's Voice initiative. So people Google Parkinson's Voice initiative, they can participate in a smartphone study on their Android device. Now that version of the app isn't as sophisticated or as user-friendly as the Apple version, but that's another opportunity for people to participate in a research study if they have an Android device.
Here's a great question from Camila that I'd like you to take, Ray Dorsey. Camila says, in traditional trials, we confirm diagnosis. How can you make sure you're getting data from the right people? Which is really an interesting question, because one of the traditional problems in research is that because diagnosis there's no objective biomarker measure to actually confirm diagnosis in Parkinson's. It's based on clinical observation. We may have people participating in research who don't actually have Parkinson's, and that could, of course, skew the results. This doesn't really get at that problem necessarily either, right? But speak to that in this overall question of how you really validate data, given that you're dependent on users, people with Parkinson's, to just enter, and you have to kind of trust in that.
Yeah, so we did this study with Claire and her colleagues at Michael J. Fox, in which we did assessments on 160 individuals who had self-reported Parkinson's disease as part of their Fox Trial Finder profile. And what we did there was we did remote video visits with 160 of them in 39 different states, and in 97% of cases, we validated or we agreed with the diagnosis that they had self-reported, that a Parkinson's specialist thought that indeed they did have Parkinson's disease. So there are ways to validate what is being self-reported on these tools, and our experience to date is that people are pretty good at reporting their diagnosis accurately, and we were fortunate to be able to do that again in a way that didn't require participants to come to us, but we were able to come to them. In the future, could we do remote assessments, off a phone or devices like that to validate the reports that people are providing to us? I think we're just scratching the surface of what's possible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Bob Harmon, maybe you can comment on this. Many people, especially spouses and partners of people with Parkinson's, will say that when they accompany their partner who has Parkinson's to a neurologist visit, they'll sort of be at their best. They'll say, "I'm doing great," and they'll, and even physically will sort of make an effort to walk better, stand up straighter, tap faster, whatever. I guess in some ways this is a bit, this way of collecting data on your phone or whatever is a bit more objective, in the sense that you can only do what you can do. You can't pretend that you're doing better than you are.
Well, I think you touched on it before when you said you knew your personal record for tapping on the Empower. I do the same thing, and of course I do the same thing when I go to the doctor. Our family has the standing rule that anybody can rat me out when I'm not telling the doctor everything he needs to know. But this kind of takes that off of them, and it's more representative of what's going on, not in that 1/2 hour that I'm with him. I mean, all of my visits to the doctor are generally right around when I met up. So he's seeing me at my best, and I'm trying to be at my best, and he needs to be showing me when I'm at my worst.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, great point. Claire, there are a number of people writing in more about the smartwatch, and of course, that's something that's been in the news recently with new smartwatch availability. Can you clarify a little bit more about that, how that will be used, availability? And also, for people who can't afford these, someone else raised the question earlier that I was going to get to, but I'll just ask you to comment on that as part of this, that sometimes this stuff is really expensive. Is there a way that people can participate in this who might not be able to buy the new smartwatch or an iPhone or whatever, so that we don't have a kind of technological divide between the haves and have-nots and their ability to participate in this kind of research?
Absolutely. So I think your first question was about what kind of data are we going to get from this. And I think whereas maybe some of the data collected in, the online surveys in Fox Insight and even some in the Empower app is maybe not, is what we would call subjective data, which is, how are you feeling today and what are your symptoms? What we collect through these smartwatches is what we call objective data, where the smartwatch actually has an accelerometer, which is measuring your movement. So short of you being in performance mode at all times, that is going to measure, it's regardless of sort of the patient's version of what's going on, that is going to measure exactly what's happening with your movements. And, Parkinson's being a movement disorder, the smartwatch matched with measuring Parkinson's is actually a really, really nice marriage. And those are the kinds of things that, data from those movements are the exact kinds of things that researchers are going to be able to look at.
So it could measure your arm swing or that kind of thing,
exactly.
right?
It could measure your arm swing. It could measure your tremor. It could measure dyskinesias. Yeah. It could measure, decreasing dyskinesias as medications are coming on, also wearing off as well. And already we're working pretty significantly with a team at Intel to model some of this, to really understand, how can we immediately detect without you, the patient, telling us I'm starting to wear off or the meds are starting to kick in. So we're already starting to develop some algorithms that will really be able to apply to larger and larger numbers through this Fox Insight rollout of these watches. And so that brings us to, how do I get one? And so the best way to get one is to register for Fox Insight and to complete the profile through the computer there. In that registration process, we ask you, what kind of phone do you have? Do you have an Android? Do you have an Apple? And based on that, if you indicate an Android, we will invite you to be a part of this wearable device study. In the wearable device study, you have to bring your own Android phone. We're actually going to mail you the watch for free for the first 1,000 people. So that gets a little bit to the cost question, especially in the short term. But the best way to get in on that is really to register for Fox Insight. And for those who have the Android, we're going to be offering that in the near term, and the hope is that eventually over time we have something that's available to people on all platforms, so iPhones too. But that will take some time to develop, but it's definitely something that's on our radar. In terms of how people afford these, like I said, the first 1,000 watches we're going to be able to provide. We are exploring the possibility of integrating other kinds of watches and devices at a variety of price points. I think one of the things that we've talked about internally but don't have any sort of final news on is, is there a way where we can offer these potentially at a discount to members of the Parkinson's community, because we are very aware of that. But I would say, the watches are cool. They're very sexy right now, given the launch of the iWatch, and people are wearing Fitbits and Nike Fuel Bands all over town. But watches aren't the only way to contribute. I mean, a very important and key way that people can contribute is simply by going online and logging in. And so, I don't want people to think, well, if I'm not doing the watch stuff, my data isn't valuable, because you can be doing the app stuff. You can be doing the online components. And the online components are going to grow significantly over time. So right now, the online component is family history and meds and symptoms and your PD experience. But eventually it's going to be surveys on your sleep, surveys on on-off experiences. So the research opportunities to contribute through various different modalities are only going to be increasing over time.
And Ray Dorsey, on this same question, it's something that I think is an interesting thing about making sure that we're getting data across the whole socioeconomic spectrum. One problem I think that may happen in research is that people who tend to, whether it's come to conferences or participate in research trials, are people who are sort of already engaged. We see this at the conferences that we do at the Fox Foundation, for example. And one hope, I guess, I would have for this new way of collecting data is that it essentially would make it more democratic, small d. I mean, that we would be able to reach out and get more people involved so that we're not missing out on interesting information, because part of what we'll be able to learn over time is, are there differences between men and women? Are there differences between, people in different parts of the country? We can if we can reach this out and get these available to people all over, it seems to me we would get a deeper and richer picture of the overall Parkinson's experience.
Again, absolutely. So what we know right now from research studies is that the people who participate in research studies, especially clinical trials, are overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly well-educated, and very likely from higher socioeconomic groups. And that's likely to be the same, too, if you're doing a study with an Apple smartphone. And we also know that there's a digital divide that exists. But that digital divide is probably going to getting smaller over time. It still disproportionately affects older Americans. It disproportionately affects those from minority groups. But right now, 46% of people over 65 have a smartphone. And this study, although it doesn't get at the socioeconomic factors, it does get at geography. So right now, anyone anywhere in the U.S. who has a current Apple smartphone can participate in a Parkinson's research study. And that's unprecedented to be able to do that in a way that provide us objective data on your symptoms and to get that information back. So I think we've done a great job in terms of making this enabling geographic freedom, but we have not done a very good job to date at addressing those who are on the other side of the digital divide.
Question from Kathy. What's the plan about delivering these findings both back to patients and also, I guess, Ray Dorsey, on to doctors? Where are we in this process? A number of people are wanting to know, are we using this now? Is this in the testing phase? When can we actually get our hands on this data, and when can this data get back to our doctors?
So the one beautiful thing is that if you're participating in the study, you can get the hands on the data immediately, because as soon as you do your tapping test, you can see your score, and you can see how your score has changed within the day and over time. It sounds like I didn't know you could print out the results and share those with your clinician. So some of these data are available to individuals immediately, which is in contrast to many clinical trials in which you never actually find out the results, or if you do, you find out the results for the group as a whole and never for you as an individual. We're into week 5 of the study, and so we haven't developed fully our plans for analyzing the data. We hope to do that in the near future. It's also worth noting that individuals participating in the Empower study have a choice to make, and they get to choose whether they're going to share their data only with the researchers who are involved in the study directly, or to share it with the broader research community. And if they do the latter, they're going to enable researchers from all over the world to use the data to come up with new insights that we may never have even thought of. So the potential for information is much greater, and the big thing is that individuals have control of their individual data and can use it immediately.
And Ray Dorsey, lots of people want to know about whether or not this crosses borders. In other words, can people participate if they're from Canada or New Zealand or Denmark or, Uganda or wherever? Is this something that anybody can participate anywhere on the globe?
So right now the studies, chiefly for IRB reasons, Institutional Review Board ethics review, is limited to the United States. We're in active discussions to bring this to the Netherlands, and in active discussions to bring this to China. The Android study that I mentioned before is open to anyone who speaks English, reads and understands English anywhere in the world. We have participants from 13 different countries in that study. So again, we're not there yet in terms of making a global effort, but you can readily see that tools like this can enable people in vast parts of the world who've never been able to participate in research study to do so. And importantly, in many parts of the world, the vast majority of people with Parkinson's disease have never been diagnosed and never been treated, even though the condition is eminently treatable. And we view this as a platform to increasing not only the ability to participate in research, but also as the ability to receive care in the future.
Let's go back to some of the questions that we raised right at the top of our discussion today about there are these difficult problems in Parkinson's disease that we don't really have very good answers to yet. Like, why is the disease so variable? Why does it progress so differently from individual to individual? Bob Harmon's PD is different than Dave Iverson's PD, so forth and so on. So Ray Dorsey, how does this approach begin to help us understand those sorts of questions in a way that perhaps traditional research has so far yet been unable to provide the answer?
Well, the biggest thing is we have an enormous number of participants in the study, 12,000 individuals with Parkinson's and without. So it's important to understand that individuals who do not have Parkinson's, so long as they're over 18 and can read and understand English, can participate in the study, that we can make comparisons between those with the disease and those without the disease. In addition, with such a large number of individuals, we can look at different factors that could be influencing the variability that you've identified in individuals with Parkinson's. We can make comparisons between those who are older and those who are younger, those who are men and those who are women, those who are taking medications and those who aren't taking medications, those who are exercising frequently and those who aren't. So we're going to be able to do types of analyses on a much larger scale and much greater detail to look at some of these sources of variability than we've been able to do so in the past.
And Claire, is that part of what the role of Fox Insight will be as well, to sort of pool all of this information together from not only Empower but all these other studies? It reminds me a bit of what goes on during political campaigns, since we're now entering that season in the United States, where candidates and their campaign staffs always want to know, well, how are we doing with Latino women, or how are we doing with older people, or with union members, or whatever. This is a way of sort of collecting all of that, right? So that we can kind of make those sorts of, begin to get a clearer understanding of variability. Is that part of what Insight is doing, is collecting all of this so we can kind of cross-tabulate the disease in a way that we've not been able to before?
That's exactly right, Dave. And I think a lot of the questions, the research questions that Dr. Dorsey referred to are exactly the kinds of questions we're eager to answer. I think one of the benefits that Fox Insight brings to this is sort of efficiency from the patient. So for patients who are repeat participants in clinical trials, they often say, well, I provided all this data to that one trial, can't you just replicate it in the next one? And sometimes the way the question's framed is differently, and largely speaking, the answer ends up being no. And so the beauty of Fox Insight is that you can sort of provide that information about your symptoms, about when you were diagnosed, about what medications you take, in sort of one centralized place that then can be used to classify data you're contributing and all the other different features. And so that's why sort of the online component of this, while it may not seem terribly exciting to go in and tell us what medications you're on, that's sort of the centralized place that then once researchers start using this and they want to see, women under 55 who experience the symptom of dyskinesia, what their wearable device data looks like, that's sort of the way that they're then going to be able to characterize that data, and it saves, I think, the wearable device study from having to re-ask a lot of those questions.
Bob Harmon, maybe you can respond to this. One person is asking, how do you make sure people keep giving their data? How do we make sure that people keep entering that in, which is interesting. It sounds like you're very consistent about making sure you enter that stuff in. Is that just because you feel like you've got, a big stake in this? What is it that motivates, I guess, compliance and ongoing participation?
Well, I'd like to say it's a want to do good for the general public, but it's not. It's selfish. I want to give all the information I can give to anybody who can use it to find the cure, and I'm willing to do that. I get reminders from Empower when I don't do something.
I know, you get that annoying alert at 5 o'clock every day. Yeah.
Exactly. And then I go do it. So, it helps me help myself. And I also get an email when it's time for me to do a Fox Insight re-up on my information of how I'm doing. So the tools provide you the ability to remember. They don't give you the incentive to do it. And that's just individualized on what your motivational levels are. Mine just happen to be pretty high.
Yeah, well, there's nothing like an enlightened self-interest, I think,
Exactly.
to be a good prompt. Ray Dorsey, a question about privacy. A number of people have raised this, always worth mentioning. How can we protect privacy, this person asks, so information shared over the internet and phone is safe? What about privacy concerns?
Sure. So just on the first one about motivation to use it. So we're hoping to make these tools and apps as useful to participants as possible. So if there are things that can make it more useful to individuals, so we rely less on altruism and more on direct benefit to participants, we're always eager to know that. So if people have those suggestions, put them into their app, email me, let Claire know. We'd be happy to develop apps that are more value to participants. On privacy, it's a huge concern. A couple things. One, Apple has said that Apple's not publicly indicated they're not receiving any of the data, and they're being stored in secure databases. The information that's being captured is being de-identified from the individuals, so that when we get speeded tapping or tapping scores, we're going to get tapping scores on individuals who are 50 years old and have had Parkinson's for 5 years, but we're not going to get it on Mr. Bob Harmon. That said, as we indicate in the consent process, if people who are very, very, very dedicated to trying to reconstruct the identity of participants in the study, we can't promise that that's not possible, although we've taken steps to minimize that risk. We know that the success of these studies is in large part due to our ability to protect individuals' privacy, especially the privacy of their health information, including mine since I'm a participant in the study. So we've taken steps to minimize the risk of breach of privacy. We know that those steps aren't perfect and it's not infallible, and we're going to continue to work to make it safer for individuals to participate in the future.
Question from Becky Ray Dorsey about whether or not any of the tests measure cognitive abilities. There is part of, we saw in the little video, one part of the Empower procedure where it shows you a pattern and then you have to replicate that pattern as a way of testing your memory. Although I would say that it's a tricky challenge, because in some ways that's also not just measuring my memory, it's measuring my dexterity. I have to be able to tap to indicate that I remember. So it's a tricky problem, isn't it, to really have a device that can really gauge cognition in a pure way.
Yes, and there are ways, some a little bit on the invasive privacy side, and some direct tests like you saw in the example. There have been studies, for example, that look at people's written language, and can detect early signs of Alzheimer's disease based on their writing, for example. And so you could think about looking at the frequency of individuals' phone calls. So people who develop dementia become more withdrawn. You can look at text. You could have them write different writing samples or things like that to evaluate their thinking. I think we're just scratching the surface of what tools we could use to better understand the role and impact of cognition in Parkinson's disease. But I think we now carry around devices that provide avenues for us to better assess how thinking could be affected in individuals with Parkinson's disease, and the key is to do that in a way that's non-invasive and doesn't invade the individual's privacy.
Question from Marilyn Ray on whether or not you can participate if you have DBS, deep brain stimulation. Claire, add in too if you have anything. Are there any sort of preconditions, I guess, that rule you in or rule you out of your ability to participate in this new approach to research?
So the entry criteria are simple. You have to be over 18. You have to reside in the United States, and you have to be able to read and understand English. Other than that, whether you have Parkinson's disease, you have DBS, not taking medicines, taking medicines, have cancer, don't have cancer, anything else, you're all able to participate. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to participate in research, and I think Claire and her colleagues at the Michael J. Fox Foundation are trying to do exactly the same thing.
I would completely agree with that. And I think, as researchers, like I said, are going in and sort of maybe looking at wearable device data on people who have had DBS, that's a perfect research question. And so we need people with DBS. We need people who are newly diagnosed. We need people who are young onset. We need people who have had a long and short disease duration. We need people who are of all ethnicities. We need people of all genders. And I think, diversifying this as much as possible is in all of our best interest.
Intriguing question from Matthew, Ray, Dorsey, or Claire, either of you, on how you plan on handling the differences between different devices. Matthew raises the question, for example, that different smartwatches have different accelerometers. So how do you do that if it's if not apples and oranges, it's apples and Androids. So how do you figure that out?
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, that's why we're starting with one particular device, and that's why we're starting with the Pebble Watch on Android to begin to sort of be a first foray into this. I think there will be some, as we add, one of the major challenges of adding in the Fitbit and the Fuel Band and all the other sort of wearable devices that others might already have or might be familiar with is sort of figuring out ways to translate the algorithm between the Pebble to what is used on those particular platforms and then being able to present it back to researchers in a standardized way. And that is a massive undertaking. I won't lie and say that we know exactly how that would happen, but I think it's something that over the long term we want to try and figure out, because at the end of the day, ideally, you could put something out there that says bring your own device, bring your own phone, and start tracking your data without us having to sort of prescribe only this device and we have to provide it and those sorts of things. That is the long-term vision, but it's going to take us a while before we get there.
Mm-hmm. Let's move to our last slide and begin to wrap up our conversation. And by way of summary, this is on this last slide, we just want to be able to get some sense of where we are right now and whether or not we're able to begin to use this data soon. So as we see on the slide now, Ray Dorsey, it says, where are we with these tools today? How we're bring us up to date on how soon these measures that we're taking now with Empower and other devices are actually going to begin to provide answers. Are we still in kind of the testing phase? Are we actually collecting this data? Are researchers using it? Where are we?
So Ray Kurzweil, the chief engineer of Google, wrote a great book called Singularity, and he points out through history things happen at accelerating rates. And if you think about, 10 years ago, I think smartphones were first introduced, and now they're among the most commonly owned devices, maybe, in some parts of the world more common than, or at least mobile phones are more common than refrigerators and shoes. So I think the trajectory here could be very rapid and very fast. I think the idea that we're going to be using diaries that say on, off, and on with dyskinesias as the primary or main or the one on which people rely on the most over the next 10 years, I think will be less likely. I think we'll come to accept that we need objective measures that measure people's diseases, whether it's Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, in real time and frequently will increasingly become part of standard clinical research and eventually standard clinical care. So I think, maybe I'm optimistic and maybe this is the area in which I invest a lot of my time and energies in. But I think it's likely that we're going to see these devices influence clinical research and clinical care at accelerating rates. And that, 10 years from now when we're having one of these other calls, and maybe it'll be a video call, that we'll look back and see that this is just the seeding of a much larger effort.
And Claire, it's important, I think, probably to conclude before I get Bob Harmon to give a closing thought to say that this is not either or. I mean, as you said earlier, we need people to participate in all forms of research, and there's a way in which these can work in a complementary fashion. So it's not like we're suggesting that these new forms of research will do away with what we have done in the past.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, we need both, right? And we're getting a strong picture from the traditional clinical trial model, and I think, things like Fox Insight, things like Empower have the potential to just sort of be an added layer and an added picture of the PD experience that we otherwise aren't currently capturing. And I think it could lead to some really, really promising brand new hypotheses and roads to go down and things to be exploring in the research landscape that patients are thinking about, patients are experiencing on a daily basis, but that researchers just haven't caught on to. And I think in that way, this is really about the patient at the center and the patient sort of filtering out, across, down, and up to researchers about what is it really like, and then using that to inform maybe some more rigorous studies on particular issues that otherwise maybe aren't even on our radar.
And Bob Harmon, let me have you give the last word. We see up on the screen now the ways in which people can participate in research, both through Fox Trial Finder, the more traditional means of clinical research, as well as the new Fox Insight and others. But offer, if you would, Bob, a last thought about what you said before. I think touched on it, which is that it's in our own self-interest to participate. So maybe a last thought from you about why you choose to participate in research, both the old-fashioned kind as well as these new efforts.
Well, I think it's really simple. If we don't do it, it can't get done. If someone with PD doesn't step up, they can't go from mice to a cure. They've got to do it with our help. And I think that with these products we've talked about, in conjunction with the traditional trials, are easy. It's a very low-impact thing to do. Empower, it's 2, 3, 4 minutes a day. The Fox Insight product not only helps with data, but it links to clinical trials. It links to physician reports to get prepared to go to your doctor. It gives you your own information as a tool today to make it easier for you to communicate with your docs and get the best care you can get.
Bob, thank you. I want to thank all of our participants today, Bob Harmon, along with Ray Dorsey and Claire Meunier at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Thank you all. We'll be sending out a link to the webinar on demand so that you can listen again or share this with others. We'll also be sending out a survey link in that email, in which you can share your thoughts about today's presentation. It's always useful to hear from people about what we're doing well and what you'd like to see us improve upon so that we can continue to refine what we're doing on these third Thursday webinars. Our next one will be on May 21st, also at 12 noon Eastern, and we're going to talk about, I think, a subject that comes up a lot, which is what about alternatives? What about complementary alternative approaches to managing Parkinson's disease? We'll take that up on May the 21st, which will be our next third Thursday webinar. And last, just a reminder that if we didn't get to your question today about these new forms of research, you can join us on Twitter tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern. Hashtag is FoxPDChat, and that'll be an opportunity to dig into this topic a little more deeply. Thanks again to everyone for participating. Join us again in May for our next third Thursday webinar. I'm Dave Iverson.